Hey, welcome to the second lesson of the course in which we are going to talk about our camera's light measuring modes. It's a little button inside the menu which helps us to understand better certain lighting situations, especially when we face high contrast situations. Before talking about measuring modes, I need to clarify some concepts about light direction and contrast, or quality of the light. There are some basic features of the lighting of our scene, like the intensity, which is the amount of light with which we are working with. We control that amount of light with the lens aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And on the other hand, we have the direction of the light, that is, where the light we are going to be working with is coming from. The position of the beam of light is really important in order to position ourselves and getting the results we are looking for, okay? And on the other hand, we have to pay attention to the quality of light. When in photography we talk about quality of an image, it's something very different from when we are talking about quality of light. Quality of light refers to the contrast on the scene, that is, the difference in a photography between the lights and the shadows. If there are few shadows and the lighting is more or less homogeneous, we are talking about a smooth lighting. Or if we have a completely lateral or very direct light that generates a part with lights and another part with shadows, that's when we are talking about a hard or high contrast light, which makes a part well lit and another remaining in shadows. And we'll lose detail, okay? I've brought here a light point, which I'll turn on, and my model here, which will help us, so that you can see the effect of the direction of light. First, we are going to talk about the direction, because we can create different effects depending on how we position the light. If we have the light above the subject with a 90 degrees down angle, the shadows are projected downwards and we can appreciate very well the volume of the object. If we set the light the opposite direction, this might be the least natural direction because usually light doesn't come from below. We are talking 90 degrees up angle light, and if we set front light, there's usually very few shadows, but the object flattens. And if we set a side light, for example, what we do is create a volume in the dark. Okay, I can use both this side and these other sides, okay? And then we also have the backlight, a very expressive light, much more dramatic, because what it does is leave the subject's shape in shadow, and sometimes it can create a light halo surrounding the object. So that's regarding light's direction. What happens with quality of light? Take a look. It's not the same for me to set the light very close to the dark. See, there's a very light zone and a zone with a lot of shadows. And the dark shadow is very hard on the table. In photography, you will also find accessories like, for example, this diffuser, which is a kind of white fabric which smooths out the source of light. So, if I place the diffuser between the lamp and the dog, notice that we practically lose that contrast. It gathers the light, it widens it, and it makes it more diffused. So, knowing about light contrast is basic for you to understand properly when to use each light metering mode. What your cameras usually do when you are about to take a picture is to evaluate the whole scene and measure the light of everything you are seeing. Remember that our camera works measuring reflected light. This scene reflects a certain amount of light, this other scene reflects another amount of light, depending on the color of the objects and the light and the contrast your scene has. There's several metering modes in your camera. If you turn it on and look for it in the menu, you can access it through the menu button in the shot mode options, or you can find a shortcut in this Canon model. I can access through the quick control screen to the metering modes, which are here, okay? In this case, this camera has 4 metering modes. Most of the cameras have 3 or 4 or maybe one more, but those extra ones are variations of variations. So check how many metering modes your camera has in the instruction manual and read thoroughly what each of them means, which I'll explain in a bit, but each manufacturer will explain it in a slightly different way. So I'll get into the metering modes, and in this camera we have evaluative metering, which is the first one. In other camera models, it might be called matrix metering or multi-segment also, okay? So evaluative matrix multi-segments, all of these are referring to a general metering. That is, I consider all the light of everything I see in frame, and I do that equally. If there's shadows here, midtones here, and highlights here, the camera registers all that information and takes an average value. Okay, that's probably the default metering mode on your camera, and that's the one I recommend you to leave on, because usually it works well. When will that metering mode not work well? Well, mostly when you have a high contrast light like this one. I have one very light spot and the rest in shadow. Imagine that it was off and we only had this point of light and the rest was completely dark, or for example about a concert, or any other scene with backlight. When there's a high contrast in lighting and almost everything is in shadow and there's very low light, the importance of doing a proper light metering is essential. Which metering mode should we use when we have a high contrast scene? Well, there are cameras if you get into the metering modes menu again. As we said before, evaluative is the main one, okay? But we find others like the center weighted average, partial, and spot. There are cameras that don't have the spot metering option and have only the partial metering one, and vice versa. That's why I recommend you to take a look to your camera and see the name the manufacturer uses and the differences between each mode. Center-weighted average, that's the first we are going to do. Before we were talking about matrix metering modes, and now we're going to talk about center-weighted average from our frame. It will give more weight to the central zone, 75% to the central zone and 25% to the rest. It will work great for general scenes, but when we want to put special emphasis in a detail, like a portrait, outdoors, or a detail of something in particular, we know it will focus on the weight to the central zone, that is, the light of the central zone of the scene. And if we have a lot of contrast, when we have a spotlight directly on an object, or, as I was saying before, a concert, spotlight and the rest completely in dark, completely in shadow, that's when it's interesting to rely on very precise metering modes, like a spot or partial metering. And as I was saying, depending on the camera, you can find even variants of the spot metering modes. What's up with those modes? They are the most critical and demanding, but they are the most precise, so if you learn to work with them, you'll make a correct light measurement and take the photo exactly as you like from the beginning. If this is my framing, the spot metering mode only considers the central point to register the light measurement of the scene. If it's partial metering mode, the difference is that